Helicobacter pylori is a very interesting microbe. A few years ago in Australia, researchers did some studies that showed that when that microbe was present, that it was tended to cause ulcers in people, and it had a higher risk for people to get gastric cancers, stomach cancers. And yet at the same time, we know that there's an association of Helicobacter pylori's presence and helping people who have asthma, colitis, reducing the risk for developing intestinal infections. And the question is what should we do when H. pylori is present? In general, more than half of the population in the world harbors different amounts of H. pylori. And probably the effects that it has on the human body depends on how much of it's present. Because we know it can make toxins that can cause issues, but if there's not enough H. pylori around, a little bit of toxin isn't going to be a problem. But if it overgrows and it becomes very populous in the intestinal tract, then we start to see some of the problems that we see that cause the ulcers and gastric cancers. So the question then is, what do we do if H. pylori is present? Initially, we thought we should treat everybody who had H. pylori because we knew that the risk for developing ulcers and cancer was quite frightening. And now we even find that there's an association with type 2 diabetes. Even though a previous study was published in the journal Diabetes Care in January of 2012, it showed that the risk for developing diabetes, type 2 diabetes, if you had H. pylori present, was increased twice. And another article came out in March of this year, of 2012, in the Journal of Infectious Diseases, showing that the presence of H. pylori was associated with a high hemoglobin A1C level, which is the long-term average blood sugar level for the past 3 to 4 months. They also found that people who were overweight tended to have a bigger chance for developing type 2 diabetes, which we know anyway. So what do we do when we find H. pylori is present? Do we go in there with triple therapy? Are we using a couple of antibiotics and a proton pump inhibitor and some Pepto Bismol for a few weeks to try and eradicate it? Do we try to boost the immune defenses of the intestinal tract so that our body is able to maintain the right level of H. pylori there? In mainstream medicine, we tend to get quite reactive, and it's usually a fight against the microbe. So the standard of practice, particularly if someone has an ulcer or is at risk for developing a cancer of the intestinal tract, that we go ahead and treat. However, I think there's another way to look at it, and supporting the intestinal tract is what we should be considering. Adding something like a probiotic, which is those friendly microbes that live in the intestinal tract normally, and get them to be more healthy. Maybe feed them a little bit more fiber. We can use something called a prebiotic. We can add a little bit of L-glutamine, which is a major metabolic fuel of the small intestine and is used by the rest of the intestinal tract as well. And we could use products that have a lot of different things that support the growth of the right kinds of bacteria in the gut. If we do that, there's a good chance that we can solve the problem without having to use triple therapy with all the antibiotics that are involved. Because when we do that, we disturb the normal microflora of the gut. That balance is like an ecosystem that might be comparable to what a jungle is like or a forest is like. There are thousands of different species of microbes in the gut, and they live in a complex ecosystem that should be maintained because it has a lot to do with how well or how sick we're going to be. So when we look at H. pylori, we have to think twice. Is it good for us? Is it bad for us? It depends on the setting, and we also have to keep in mind that it's an association. It's not proven, except for the case of ulcers and cancers, that there is a direct cause that is from the H. pylori. It could be that there are other factors that are involved that determine whether or not somebody's going to need to do something aggressive about H. pylori or do it the gentle way, where you can just support wellness and let the body do the healing.